The Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted, narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 168, in which we will be looking at part 2 of the 2002 British Broadcasting Corporation radio play. First of all, though, last week, as is my habit, I missed Richard Adams' posthumous 104th birthday, which fell on the day it was recorded, for which I apologise. Happy birthday, Mr. Adams. So then, let's finish the 2002 radio play. The 2002 BBC Radio 4 radio play, Part 2. Part 2 of the 2002 BBC radio play of Watership Down was first broadcast on Sunday 6th of October 2002 on BBC Radio 4. Its last broadcast was on Friday 20th of December 2013 on BBC Radio 4 Extra. You can listen to Part 2 on YouTube at the Lapine Radio Play archive. There will be a link in the notes. The second part opens with a reprise of the final scene in Part 1, in which Fiver was told Hazel had been shot by Dandelion and said he knew he wasn't dead. He ends by saying they must get a rescue party together. For some reason I missed that part last week. Behind this scene, the violin theme plays, and we then go into the credits, which are the same as for Part 1. Keha is urgently crying out to Bigwig and Dandelion that he has found Hazel in a ditch at the bottom of the hill. This cuts out Fiver's dream about the bloody hole, after which he takes Blackberry to show him where Hazel was shot. Once found by Fiver, Hazel then has an agonising journey to the ditch, which is a significant location in the book. Here, Hazel has apparently got himself to the ditch. Fiver's role in all this being minimised is partly compensated for by his immediately knowing that Hazel was not dead. But it is still an actual change in the plot, which this version has not done much of so far. Fiver and Bigwig arrive at the ditch where Keha takes out the shotgun pellets. He then flies off to let everyone else know Hazel is okay. After an interlude, Holly is telling Hazel about the expedition to the large warren that Keha found. In the book, Holly gives his account while they still think Hazel is dead. For the first time, we hear the word Ephrafa, as Holly makes it clear what kind of warren it is. We also hear about General Woundwort. Holly says they were captured by a patrol and taken before the council. After being assigned to an Owsler unit rather than a mark, they managed to escape their guards. This happened near the Iron Road, where just as the guards were getting the better of them on the tracks themselves, the messenger from Frith arrived. We hear the sound of a train horn, and it is a British-sounding one, I'm glad to say. And briefly there is quite an undramatic sound of a train passing. The experience of the expedition to Ephrafa has been far shorter than in the book, and by the sound of it, considerably less traumatic. Also, Holly has not encountered Heisensley or Blackavar. It seems Holly may have talked to Hazel in the ditch as he recovers. However, in the next scene, a general meeting is taking place in the Great Hall, as the Honeycomb is called in this version. Hazel apologises for surviving being shot and announces the plan to raid Ephrafa. This has been discussed with Blackberry. This meeting, despite being part of a highly truncated part of the plot, is true to the book. However, there is no criticism of the plan from Holly. The rabbits who agree to join the expedition seem to be the same, and after an interlude, we're in the middle of it, as Hazel asks Silver for directions. They are already in wide patrol range of Ephrafa, and Keha directs them to the Iron Road and river. They plan to make a wide circle around Ephrafa. There has been no incident with Bigwig and a fox, and neither has this Bigwig demanded to hear the tale of Elacrara and the Black Rabbit of Inlay. Another interlude, and we are at the Iron Road. Keha warns of an approaching patrol, and they immediately seemingly crossing the tracks that are cutting, as in the book, rather than going under the tracks of Keha Bridge, as in the 1978 film. Once across, Keha guides them to the River Test, where they cross a road bridge to shelter on the far side. After another interlude, Hazel is talking to the rest about his plan, which they all seem more in on than in the book. Hazel is going over the objectives of the plan for the first time we hear them, as his discussion at the foot of Watership Down was missed out. He still needs a way of getting away from any Ephratham pursuit. An exploration of the river brings them to the plank bridge, which Keehar had not noticed. And then Keehar, rather than Fiver and Blackberry, finds the punt. The escape plan down the river rapidly follows, and Bigwig good-naturedly sets off for Ephratham. After another interlude, we seemingly find ourselves in a human British courtroom, as a booming voice addresses a prisoner at the bar. This threw me for a minute, and highlights an interesting issue with translating Lapine, which all rabbits throughout the book must be speaking in, into English. Obviously, this is actually a trial in Ephratham, and being generous, whatever phrase rabbits there use to address the accused has been translated into British English using a British legal phrase. But does the phrase prisoner at the bar take that a bit too far? In any case, this being Ephratham is a court-martial, and the accused is the Owsla company commander who let Holly and co escape. He has been found guilty. The calm officer's attempt to defend himself is silenced by the judge, who is General Woundwort, who then reels off the list of accusations against him. The worst of these is that Lieutenant Charlock was killed on the Iron Road, as in the book. The unnamed officer is sentenced to death and led away. This whole scene does not appear in the book and acts as a shortcut to the character of Woundwort, who, as in the 1984 radio play, does not have the thick voice of a hulking brute, but the thinner voice of an army officer, albeit one gone very bad. Captain Campion arrives to tell Woundwort about the Clessie they have picked up by the railway arch, as in the book and 1978 film. This Clessie calls himself Bigwig rather than Flaley. The convention of his Lapine name being used in Ephratham is not followed. His job interview for a place in the Owsla is successful, and he is placed under the supervision of Campion, who has the slightly more working-class south-east English accent of a non-commissioned officer. Campion, rather than Chervil, explains the running of a Silflay to Bigwig. And now we are with Heisensley and her friends as she recites part of the same sad poem as in the book. Interrupted by Bigwig, this Heisensley is more forthcoming than the one of the book about how their misery makes them unable to give birth. And of course, this Bigwig has not heard of Heisensley from Holly, who didn't have time to meet her. The does introduce themselves as Heisansley, Thethuthinang, and Nathilta, missing out the first L. Bigwig gets to the point immediately, in front of all three of them, in order to advance the narrative, rather than the more cautious approach of the secret meeting with Heisensley of the book. He rapidly sets out the plan, letting them know he is a friend of the four rabbits who escaped over the Iron Road, and he tells all of them about Keehar. Nathilta decides a better name for him is Big Head. Later on, Bigwig meets with Heisensley under the same pretense as in the book. He asks her how many does would be willing to escape. Heisensley says there are many, but the specific plan will need to be kept quiet until as late as possible. Bigwig has rather blown it on that front. Heisensley and Thethuthinang will decide on the escape party. Bigwig says they will escape at sunset, and the sooner the better. There is no talk of these does having previously tried to leave Ephratham, and there is no Blackavar. Also, there is no hint of Heisensley being psychic. She just trusts Bigwig. She tells him the escape will have to be over the next 2 days, as the Mark will then lose Evening Silflay. Bigwig says it will happen tomorrow. After an interlude, we are with Bigwig and Keehar. This Keehar is not joking around, and Bigwig tells him to pass on the message about being by the big arch at sunset that evening. He also tells him about attacking the sentries. Keehar flies away as Campion approaches. He says the bird will have to be reported after Bigwig jokingly cuffs him. The roles of Chervil and Campion have basically been merged here. Later on, Bigwig gives a final brief to Heisensley and Thethuthinang. All is ready. After an interlude, Bigwig is above ground, ready to commence the escape. He spots Keehar and is just about to start, when he is interrupted by Woundwort. He wants to know why Bigwig went so near the white bird. He also mentions Heisensley and asks Bigwig to keep an eye on her and her companions. But there are no questions about Bigwig leading a fox onto a wide patrol while he was on his way to Ephratham, because here it didn't happen. Keehar is back with Hazel and Co. at the railway arch. Unlike in the book, Keehar says he saw Bigwig go off with the large rabbit. They discuss what to do. The escape is clearly off for tonight. Hazel says he will go into Ephrafa himself if Bigwig doesn't come out tomorrow. Silver, rather than the silent Pipkin, says he will join him. After an interlude, we are back at Ephrafa. Campion is getting his mark up for Silflay when Nelthilda decides to be sarcastic with him about rabbits flying. I believe this is the first dramatic portrayal of her doing this, although she did appear in the 1984 version. Campion then spots Kihar again, and Bigwig uses the pretend charm to tell him to come back that night. Kihar reports this to Hazel. They decide to cross the river and wait by the boat, but not risk waiting at the arch. Then, if Kihar tells them the escape is underway, they will go to the arch. Hazel will stay with the boat due to his leg, and will have the rope half chewed through. Silver will look after any fighting that needs to be done. All this is completely in keeping with the book. Heisenthal is waking Bigwig to let him know that Nelthilda has been arrested. He realises they have to act quickly. Later, Campion tells Bigwig about the arrest and that Silflay is cancelled. The guard is to be doubled. And now we are with Nelthilda as she is interrogated. She has just spilled the beans when an Ausla member arrives to report the escape has begun. We have missed all of Bigwig's trickery, saying Silflay is still on, as well as his deadly violence. Woundwort orders the pursuit to begin. In doing so, he refers to gathering every jackrabbit that can be found. Apparently, the Ephrafa Ausla has some American recruits. There is a sound of thunder. The escapees are approaching the arch when Woundwort catches up with them. Bigwig tells the does to keep running and confronts Woundwort. After an exchange of insults, Woundwort is attacked by Kihar. In the book, this happens some way beyond the far side of the arch, and in the 1978 film, it happens just at the arch's far side. And now we are at the punt. The does are climbing aboard. Disappointingly, Woundwort does not arrive at the river test to see the plan fulfilled. Bigwig arrives last, and the rope breaks. The boat floats down the river. There is another sound of thunder. Kihar warns the rabbits about an approaching bridge, and the punt becomes stuck against it. The first time this has been dramatically portrayed. The rabbits all swim under the bridge. After an interlude, we are on the other side of the bridge, and Kihar announces, to a sad musical accompaniment, that he is leaving for the Peak Varta. For the first time, the journey back to Watership Down is portrayed as the rabbits encounter Campion on wide patrol. It seems they have not lost any does, as they do in the book, and Campion rapidly realises he is outnumbered and leaves. After an interlude, they are back on Watership Down and being enthusiastically greeted. Strawberry tells Hazel that Clover is going to have kittens. Holly also reports that some of the field mice are reporting new rabbits on the other side of the down. This is a change from the book, where they get some time home to relax before the mouse Hazel saved from a kestrel tells them about the new rabbits. Hazel tells Holly and Silver, rather than Blackavar, to go and take a look. Events happen rapidly now. Haystack, rather than Speedwell, immediately comes to tell Hazel Clover has had her litter. Hazel talks to Bigwig about building a good Owsla on Watership Down when Bigwig sees Holly and Silver racing back. The news of the arrival of the Ephrathans prompts an immediate filling in of the holes, and Hazel makes Holly, rather than Bigwig, temporary chief as he goes to speak with Woundwort. In the book, Campion tracks the escapees back to Watership Down and then returns to Ephrafa. Here, he was already part of the Great Patrol that has immediately tracked them back to the Down. Though this Woundwort, not having been humiliated at the riverbank, seems to lack some motivation for this even more immediate mobilisation. And how has a Great Patrol managed to covertly track their return to Watership Down? Not so early, you might argue, after Campion's breaking cover. Woundwort is just finishing having a go at Campion when a strange rabbit arrives. The conversation between Woundwort and Hazel is extended and very true to the book, except that Woundwort asking if Hazel was on the riverbank seems erroneous, as Woundwort was not there in this version. We are now in the honeycomb. The siege has begun. The Ephrathans are digging right down from above. Bigwig says he will be ready for them when they break through. However, despair is beginning to spread among the does, which Heisenthal puts a stop to. Bigwig suggests getting everyone into the sleeping burrows and blocking them off. Hazel agrees, and says that they should prepare a little reception for the attackers. Fiver is listening, going into his trance. In doing so, he does more than merely remind Hazel about the dog at the River Enbourne, with a passing reference to Rowsby Wolf, whose tale has not been told here. He more or less hands Hazel a ready-made plan, reducing Hazel's role in the defeat of Ephrafa a bit by saying he can hear a dog running up the field with death in his eyes. Hazel, having taken the cue, puts the plan into action. Blackberry and Dandelion will go with him. Bigwig will block the run, getting everyone behind it. Hazel says he is going back to the farm to gnaw another rope. During an extended piece of music, we hear Campion report 3 escaped rabbits to Woundwort, who says to let them go. Then Hazel giving Blackberry final instructions, seemingly at a field edge between the Iron Tree and Nuthanger Farm. This is the same as the book, where Blackberry is left by the road just south of Nuthanger. As the music finishes, Hazel and Dandelion are near the dog kennel at the farm. Dandelion expresses concern for Hazel, unlike in the book, who reassures him he will hide on top of the kennel. Events follow more or less as in the book, only being a radio play, we hear the cat get aggressive earlier rather than creeping up on Dandelion, and the fate of Hazel is not addressed yet. Back on Wardship Down, Campion and Woundwort are discussing their plan of attack. It has become obvious they are digging down into a large space. Woundwort says he will go in first, followed by Campion and his unit. Groundsel will wait in the shaft with some more rabbits until they know the situation. It appears there is no Vervain in this version, and Campion takes his role in the attack. Good. After the TV series, I've had quite enough of him. They enter the Great Hall, as we should remember to call the honeycomb in this version. Woundwort finds the loose earth, indicating the blocked runs, and orders them dug out. On the other side, Bigwig asks Silver for help rather than Holly. He must injure Woundwort quickly if he is to have any chance of beating him, and only the element of surprise will achieve this. Silver's comment about the defensive slack run at Sandalford gives Bigwig the idea of being buried in the floor. Bigwig says to make noise to ensure the Ephrathans focus on this burrow. The Ephrathans are breaking through. Woundwort tells Campion to get out of the way. He wants to get to Bigwig first, a desire he does not express in the book. Woundwort breaks through, and Bigwig immediately injures him. There is a brief sound of violent fighting before Woundwort retreats. In the book, there is a substantial attritional pushing fight after Woundwort's initial injury, but here there isn't time. To a jolly musical accompaniment, Bigwig seemingly pursues the injured Woundwort towards the Great Hall. Bigwig is taunting Woundwort from the opening of the run below. He is not the exhausted Bigwig of the book, and it seems the Ephrathans have withdrawn to above ground, leaving the Great Hall altogether. Woundwort tries casually asking Campion, rather than Vervain, to go and finish him off, an order that has even less credibility here. So it is Campion who gets called a coward, and reminded he is the most hated officer in Ephrafa. There will be no redemption arc for this Campion. It is now, rather than earlier, as Bigwig starts to get the better of him, that Woundwort tries enticing him with the offer of the command of any mark in Ephrafa. Bigwig's response is the chilling statement that his chief has told him to defend the run. Campion panics at this. However, Woundwort seems unaffected and starts giving orders for other runs to be opened. And now we hear Fiver. His voice doesn't echo like Bigwig's. This suggests that he has appeared above ground. He apologises to Woundwort for his death, terrifying Campion. And then the dog arrives. Woundwort's final enraged rant at his fleeing Owsla does not include the line that dogs aren't dangerous. Lucy, the human, has a rabbit that the farm cat has had a go at. Her father, the farmer, rather than suggesting he kill him, as in the book, suggests putting him in the hutch, which of course is now empty, and it appears that the dog is missing. Later, Dr. Adams notices Bob the dog returning as he arrives at the farm. He has clearly been fighting with something. The doctor agrees to look at the rabbit after he has seen Mrs. Kane, the same name as the farming family in the book. The rabbit has an old leg injury and a scratch from the cat, but is otherwise fine. The doctor offers to take Lucy with him so they can release the rabbit on the way to Cole Henley. As Lucy releases Hazel, she tells him to go and find his friends. And so, after an interlude, we are back with the narrator from the start of the first episode. He speculates on the fate of Woundwort and lets us know that Kihar returned. He also tells us about the new Ephrafa without Woundwort, as well as the new Warren halfway between them. As he closes, we hear a young rabbit address him as Hazel Ra. So this elderly narrator was not Dandelion, as I thought he might be last week. There is a musical interlude. Then, as the violin continues in the background, Hazel meets with a rabbit who invites him to join his owsler. Hazel agrees that he is ready to. The stranger tells him to leave his body behind as he won't be needing it anymore, rather than Hazel realising this himself. Hazel worries about his rabbits, but the stranger reminds him about Frith's promise to Elacrara. He suggests he come along, so he can show him what he means. And the violin plays on. Comparison with the book. As in Part 1, this portrayal of the original story stays mostly faithful to the order of events, relying on deletion rather than reordering. A notable exception is around events following the shooting of Hazel. Holly's account of the first expedition to Ephrafa in the book takes place while the rabbits of Watership Down think Hazel is dead. It is a true low point. However, here, their stay in Ephrafa has been too short to be really traumatic, and Hazel is already recovering sufficiently to hear Holly's account for himself. However, this is compensated for later with the most detailed dramatisation yet on our timeline of the escape from Ephrafa, the journey down the river, and the journey back to Watership Down. It's just strange that Woundwort, whose portrayal as an army officer gone bad was very effective, I think, did not get to the riverbank to see the punt float away, yet still referred to it when speaking to Hazel before the siege. Talking of which, Woundwort's fight with Bigwig seemed strangely short. However, we are treated to a truly creepy commiseration from Fiver just before the arrival of the dog, as well as the fullest dramatisation yet of the human section of the story, Dea Ex Machina. The ending is appropriately poignant, and I found not attempting to identify the rabbit who comes to collect Hazel quite effective. Overall then, as I said last week, an enjoyable listen that doesn't play around with the original too much, beyond the needs of summary. Next time, we hop 14 years into the future on our Watership Down timeline and look at Part 1 of the 2016 BBC radio play.